Betrayed by blood, a family's worst nightmare. Something was terribly wrong in the quiet suburban house that November morning. What should have been Peter's final day alive began like any other, with methodical precision that would soon turn horrifying. The 52-year-old court clerk moved through his routine, unaware that his own family held a deadly secret that would shatter everything he believed about the people he trusted most. Downstairs, he prepared his breakfast and packed his lunch with methodical care. At the kitchen table, Peter wrote out a check for his son Christopher's traffic fine, $100 to keep his boy out of trouble. Even with everything going on in their family, he was still looking out for his son. The morning newspaper waited for him on the driveway. Peter stepped outside, enjoying the crisp November air on his face. When he tried to get back inside, he discovered the door had locked behind him. He walked around to find the spare key his wife kept hidden by the garden, letting himself back in with a slight shake of his head at the inconvenience. Back in the kitchen, he gathered his briefcase and papers, double-checking that everything was ready for his day. As he headed toward the stairs, thinking about his colleagues who would be expecting him and the responsibilities waiting at the courthouse, his foot caught on something and he stumbled forward. The newspaper still clutched in his hand, papers scattered around him as he hit the landing. And then all went black. Hours later, when Peter failed to appear at the courthouse where colleagues depended on his reliable presence, concern turned to alarm. Detective Drew had seen plenty of crime scenes in his 20 years with the state police, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him on that cold November morning in 2004. The call came in as a welfare check, a simple request that would unravel one of the most disturbing family mysteries he'd ever encountered. Drew pulled up to the modest two-story home, its windows reflecting the gray autumn sky. The house looked peaceful from the outside, well-maintained lawn, neat flower beds, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. But as he approached the front door, that peaceful feeling began to slip away. The door was unlocked. Drew called out as he stepped inside, his voice echoing through the hallway. No response. Then he saw it, a trail of crimson droplets leading from the stairs deeper into the house. His hand instinctively moved to his radio as he followed the trail, each step revealing more disturbing evidence of what had occurred. At the base of the staircase, Drew found Peter. The 52-year-old man lay motionless, his body positioned awkwardly on the landing. The scene was devastating. Peter had suffered multiple injuries to his head and face, wounds that spoke of a vicious attack with a heavy object. Drew had to steady himself against the wall as he took in the full scope of what had happened. But this was only the beginning of the horror. Following the trail upstairs, Drew discovered Peter's wife, Joan, in their bedroom. She was alive but barely conscious, her injuries so severe that Drew immediately called for emergency medical assistance. The entire room was painted red, the walls, the bedding, even the ceiling showed signs of what had taken place. As paramedics worked frantically to stabilize Joan, Detective Bodish arrived at the scene to assist Drew with the investigation. While the medical team prepared Joan for transport, Bodish knelt beside her and asked the question that would define the entire investigation. Despite her critical condition, Joan was conscious enough to respond to simple questions with head movements. When Bodish asked if a family member had committed the attack, Joan nodded yes. When he asked if it was her older son Jonathan who was serving in the military, she shook her head no. But when he mentioned her younger son Christopher, a college student, Joan nodded again. Even in her traumatized state, she was identifying her own son as the person who had tried to end her life. As Joan was rushed to the hospital, Drew began the painstaking process of documenting the crime scene. What he discovered next would haunt him for years to come. The house told a story that seemed impossible to believe. Peter hadn't died immediately from his injuries. Despite receiving 16 separate strikes to his head and face with what appeared to be an axe, he had survived for several hours. The trail throughout the house revealed Peter's final morning routine, a routine he had somehow carried out while suffering from catastrophic head injuries. In the kitchen, Drew found evidence that Peter had attempted to make breakfast. Plates were stacked, covered in red handprints. The countertops showed where Peter had moved around, preparing what would have been his usual morning meal. On the kitchen table, investigators found a packed lunch, something Peter had apparently prepared for his workday, unaware that he would never make it to the office. Most heartbreaking of all was a check Drew discovered stuck to the inside of the dishwasher. It was made out for $100 to pay a traffic fine, a fine that belonged to Christopher, Peter's younger son. Even in his final hours, while his life was literally draining away, Peter had been taking care of his son's responsibilities. The evidence suggested that Peter had gone through his entire morning routine, showering, getting dressed, making breakfast, and handling household tasks, all while suffering from injuries that should have been immediately fatal. At one point, he had even locked himself out of the house while retrieving the newspaper, then remembered where the spare key was hidden and let himself back in. The investigation team expanded as more detectives arrived. They found the weapon, a family axe that had been stored in the garage. It was discovered abandoned near the house, covered in evidence of the attack. But strangely, there were no fingerprints on the handle, suggesting the attacker had worn gloves or carefully cleaned the weapon. As Drew and his team processed the scene over the following days, they began to focus on Christopher, the 21-year-old son who was supposedly at college 200 miles away. The initial investigation revealed that Christopher was a student at a university in Rochester, but his academic record was troubling. He had been struggling with his grades and had been forced to withdraw from school the previous year due to poor performance. Drew expanded his investigation to include financial analysis, bringing in specialists to examine the family's recent communications. What they discovered painted a picture of escalating tension between Christopher and his parents. Email records showed that Peter and Joan had been confronting their son about his academic failures and concerning behavior. The financial investigation revealed Christopher's desperate situation. He had been lying to his parents about his college expenses, telling them that his tuition was being covered by the university when in reality, he was drowning in debt. Even more disturbing, Christopher had been forging his father's signature on loan documents, using Peter's name to secure thousands of dollars without his knowledge. 2 weeks before the attack, Peter had discovered his son's deception. In an email to Christopher, Peter had written that he would be forced to file forgery charges if his son continued to abuse his credit. The message was firm but loving, ending with an assurance that despite their disappointment, Peter and Joan still cared about Christopher's future. Detective Mark, who handled the technical aspects of the investigation, made a crucial discovery about the house's security system. The family had installed an alarm system months earlier, and the electronic records showed exactly what had happened on the night of the attack. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, someone had used the master security code to disarm the system. Only 4 people knew that code: Peter, Joan, and their 2 sons, Jonathan and Christopher. Jonathan was hundreds of miles away at a military training facility where his presence had been confirmed by multiple witnesses. The security timeline revealed more disturbing details. Around 5 in the morning, the house's phone line had been cut from outside. This wasn't random. Someone had deliberately severed the connection to prevent the family from calling for help during the attack. As the investigation widened, Detective Lisa began tracking Christopher's movements on the night in question. Christopher claimed he had been sleeping in his dormitory lounge and had never left the campus. But security footage from the university told a different story. 4 separate cameras had captured Christopher's distinctive yellow Jeep leaving the campus at 10:30 p.m. on the night before the attack. The same cameras showed the vehicle returning at 8:30 the following morning, exactly the window of time when the attack had occurred. The drive from Christopher's university to his parents' house took approximately 3 hours. Toll booth operators along the route remembered a yellow Jeep with oversized tires speeding through their stations. One collector specifically recalled the excessive speed of a yellow Jeep approaching his booth shortly before 2 a.m., just minutes before the security system was disarmed at the house. Detective Tom interviewed Christopher's neighbors and discovered that one of them had seen the young man's distinctive Jeep in his parents' driveway on the evening of the attack. University students also contradicted Christopher's alibi, stating they had not seen him sleeping in the dormitory lounge as he claimed. The investigation also revealed Christopher's history of criminal behavior toward his own family. Detectives traveled across the country to recover a laptop computer that Christopher had stolen from his parents' home the previous year. He had sold the stolen laptop online, using the money for his personal expenses. This wasn't an isolated incident. The investigation uncovered a pattern of theft and deception spanning several years. Christopher had staged multiple burglaries of his parents' home, stealing valuable electronics and selling them online. In one particular scheme, he had even posed brother in emails to customers, claiming his brother had died and couldn't deliver purchased items. The county coroner later provided crucial insight into Peter's condition. The medical examination revealed that despite the severity of the wounds, none of them would have caused immediate death. This explained how Peter had been able to carry out his morning routine for several hours after the attack. The human body's ability to function on adrenaline, even under extreme trauma, had allowed Peter to continue his daily activities while essentially dying. As Joan began to recover from her injuries in the hospital, the investigation took an unexpected turn. When she emerged from her medically induced coma, Joan claimed she couldn't remember the attack. More shocking still, she began insisting that her son Christopher was innocent and couldn't possibly have committed such a crime. This created a difficult situation for the investigators. Joan's initial identification of Christopher as the attacker had been crucial evidence, but her changed testimony raised questions about the reliability of witness identification under extreme trauma. Detective Bodish stood by his account of Joan's initial responses, maintaining detailed notes about her head movements and reactions to his questions. But Joan's later statements to the media painted a different picture. She wrote letters to newspapers urging authorities to stop investigating Christopher and to search for the real killer. The case presented investigators with a complex puzzle. They had no physical evidence directly linking Christopher to the crime, no fingerprints on the weapon, no traces of crimson evidence in his vehicle or dormitory room. Christopher's employer, a veterinarian, had testified that the young man had been trained in cleaning up after surgical procedures, which could explain the absence of physical evidence. But the circumstantial evidence painted a compelling picture. Christopher's financial desperation, his history of forgery and theft, his presence in the area during the attack, and his mother's initial identification all pointed to his involvement. The investigation also revealed disturbing aspects of Christopher's personality. Fellow students described him as someone who lied frequently about his background, claiming to come from wealth when his family was actually struggling financially. Mental health experts who reviewed the case suggested that Christopher's behavior was consistent with antisocial personality traits. After months of investigation, Detective Drew and his team presented their findings to the district attorney. Despite the lack of physical evidence, they believed they had built a strong circumstantial case against Christopher. The pattern of behavior, the timeline of events, and the mounting evidence of motive all supported the conclusion that this had been an attack by a desperate son against the parents who had discovered his deceptions. The investigation had revealed a family torn apart by lies and financial pressure. Peter and Joan had been loving parents trying to help their troubled son, but their attempts to hold him accountable for his actions had apparently triggered a violent response. Christopher was arrested and charged with his father's murder and the attempted murder of his mother. Throughout the legal proceedings, he maintained his innocence, insisting he had been asleep at college during the attack. The trial that followed would test every piece of evidence the investigators had gathered. Without physical proof, the case relied entirely on the web of circumstantial evidence that Drew and his team had painstakingly assembled. After months of investigation and a grueling trial, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. Christopher was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, a sentence that would keep him behind bars until at least 2052, when he would be eligible for parole at the age of 69. The judge made it clear that he feared what had happened in the early morning hours of November could happen again, justifying the harsh sentence for a young man who had destroyed his own family. Christopher would spend the rest of his productive years in a prison cell, paying for the brutal attack that had torn apart the people who loved him most. For the investigators, this case represented one of the most challenging and emotionally difficult cases of their careers. They had witnessed the aftermath of unthinkable family violence and had worked tirelessly to piece together the truth from a complex web of deception and betrayal. The quiet suburban house that had seemed so peaceful from the outside had held secrets that shocked even experienced investigators. It served as a reminder that tragedy can strike anywhere, and that the most dangerous threats sometimes come from within our own families.